Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today Jennifer McCanna. She is an ICF coach, and she has worked with companies, especially she started her career in events and then moved into coaching. And she has done a lot of work with development within organizations, and she brings fun to that. She also is a musician by background, so brings some wonderfully unique perspectives, a celloist. And so with that, Jennifer, tell the audience a little bit about who you are. That was a big view picture. And then what you do. I want to talk about the fun that you bring, because I think what corporations lack today is that sense of learning through fun. So,
and we need it this year, don't we? After the year we've had, we need a bit of fun. Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, Lois. Where to begin? So the work that I do with organisations is both one-to-one through leadership coaching and also in groups. So leadership and management developments, for want of a better phrase. And a lot of the work I've done is with international organisations, so kind of used to the challenges that brings when you're bringing together a diverse bunch of people, culturally different backgrounds, different time zones, different, access to broadband, all that kind of thing. So, and making that fun as well as a really productive learning space.
So, okay, let's start at the beginning. You started as a celloist.
Oh, yes.
And then moved out of that. But I think what that brings is a unique sense of creativity and that right brain perspective to what you do. And so I just want the audience to have the richness of your background. So tell us a little bit about that and your move.
Yeah. So I come from a musical family and started playing the cello when I was quite young, and the piano. And it's still a big part of my life, although now I have two small children, so maybe less of a part of my life than I would like. But, it probably taught me quite a lot about, playing together. You play together in an orchestra, as I did as a cellist. And there's a lot of subliminal learning that happens when you're young around that, and the feeling of it, the feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself, the feeling of having a creative outlet. There's so many parallels between that and coaching. The work of Ben Zander actually is a really fabulous Ben and Rosamund Zander piece of work that brings together Ben's work as a conductor. He was a conductor in Boston, and his wife was a psychologist, around actually all those parallels between an orchestral conductor and leadership, and bringing out the best in people as a conductor. So maybe I was having a bit of a grounding in leadership and bringing out the best in people without really realising it when I was younger.
Isn't that amazing? But it is true that when you play in an orchestra, you can't be a one-person system because it would destroy the sound, right? And yet we have organizations where we try to grow up a lot of individuals who go in their own path of whatever. And sometimes it creates a lot of chaos.
Yeah, there's a huge piece of work in there, isn't there, about allowing everybody to play to their strengths and having that creative freedom, but whilst within a structure that you might get through organizational values, like behavioral competencies, the culture, the way we do things around here, but allowing people's sort of strengths to feed into that and feel empowered to deliver their best work.
So true.
And coaching is coaching is about bringing that out, isn't it? It's about encouraging that and empowering that rather than telling, which is something else.
So tell me, how do you go about your development of teams and groups within organizations? And I do want to come back to this piece on bringing in fun. And I think part of that goes to your musical background, because music can be fun.
Yeah, well, music needs to be inspiring, doesn't it?
It does.
And it needs to, what I find now, I used to be really impatient when I listened to an orchestra because I used to want to be in it and part of it. And actually now as a grown-up, I love the fact that actually listening to music allows me to be somewhere else. It gives me that reflection time where I'm being inspired, but actually my brain can go to a creative space. And I guess what we want to do in learning environments is take people to a creative space. If all that learning was assimilating knowledge, we would just read books and watch PowerPoint presentations and be told what to do. But it isn't that, is it? Learning is having a go at something, seeing what works. Maybe it doesn't go well, seeing what we learned, reflecting, that kind of planning, doing, reflecting, assimilating the learning, that sort of cycle. That's a really creative cycle. And doing that, we need to create spaces where people feel empowered to do that. It's okay to do that. And I guess creating those learning spaces this year has been harder because it's all been virtual, right? So how do we go about creating that same warmth, that same psychological safety, that same creative learning space online as we would do a little bit perhaps more naturally if we were given a room of people to work with. So that's been, I think, the challenge.
How have you done that? Because I hear more and more, yes, COVID may come and go. It may be a thing of the past, but hybrid workplace will remain.
Yeah.
And so when that's true, part of what we've thought is, well, when this passes, we'll go back to normal. But normal won't be normal as we probably knew it pre-COVID. So how have you done that? Because this is going to be the challenge all of us are going to have is how do we bring people together in this hybrid model that we have and make it so there's fun, there's that motivation to change, there's that interaction that coming together allows us to work through and work with.
I think it's to do with who we are being as a facilitator or as a leader of a team or as a coach in a group session and what we are doing. And it's probably useful for me anyway to separate those two things out a little bit. So, we know that a lot of communication is around the body language and tone of voice, not just the words. That research has been around for years and years, hasn't it? And we also know that in a virtual platform, quite a lot can be lost. So we can still get some of that across, but we aren't there in person. So I was trying to think about what I do to create that. Who am I being? And there is something about confidence in there. And knowing that what you're going to deliver and what you can create is valuable. But it's about warmth and, bringing a sense of fun. And because we've got this barrier, which is the screen, it's sort of supersizing that a bit. So if I look at myself when I'm welcoming people into a Zoom room, I look a bit, to me, I look like a crazy, smiling, kind of overexcited person. But actually what I'm doing is just making sure that everybody feels welcome. And I kind of need to notch it up a bit. For me, I need to make sure I'm really present, really, all the things I want people to feel, I'm embodying that. So I need to feel relaxed. I need to feel confident in what I'm delivering. I need to feel really pleased to be there. All of those things, because that's what will come across. So there is something about who we're being. And actually, I think sometimes, especially when we're leaders in an organization and maybe delivering some training for some colleagues, we don't really give much thought to that, do we? We just think, oh, I'm the head of finance. I'm going to deliver some finance training to my colleagues. We don't ever think, who do they need me to be in this session? Actually, a bit of fun will help people learn, especially this year. And it can be a really great way of being creative, because we think we know what Zoom sessions are like now. We think we know what team sessions are like there. We know we're going to sit there. We know that maybe we get to turn our video off and maybe just let it wash over us. So actually, as a facilitator, doing something that really engages people and makes them be present, that gets them to do something a little bit different, will wake them up. And people need that right now, I think. They're really up for doing something a bit different. And that kind of goes on to what you need to do, I guess, doesn't it, after who you're being. So I also think that, again, this is not something, there's a level to which this is appropriate or not, depending on who you are and who you're doing a session with. But for me, if I'm coming into an organization with a group of people, if I've not worked with them before, or maybe they've not worked with each other before, I need to be really sure that we've made some agreements as a group about how we work together. So that might be very practical things which relate to the fact that we're doing it on Zoom, like, my phone is off and hidden, or are we all going to try and have our cameras on if our bandwidth allows us to do that? Is there anything that the group need to know? Like, I know I'm expecting a delivery. Is it okay if I nip out? So, we know the trials of working from home. My plumber's about to arrive. Is it okay if I dip out? All those practical agreements about, how we're going to actually run the session. And as a facilitator, you can, at that point, really flag what you're expecting. So, if you're going to use breakout rooms or polls or quizzes to break it up a bit, you can let people know that, so that they are getting into the sort of energy of, oh, right, this is going to be an engaging session. I'm going to need to listen because I'm going to have some engagement and input. And then you go on from the practical stuff into the how are they going to get the most out of the session? So what do they need from their colleagues? And what does that look like? So often you elicit words like, well, we need to respect each other's contribution, or we need to listen well. And I always think that it's useful to delve a bit deeper into that. Like, well, what does that look like? Because what feels respectful for me might be different for somebody else. So how are we going to contribute to the session? And what do we need from each other? And that's a really good way into asking people to share, if they're comfortable, like how they're arriving into the session. I run some action learning sets, and we always have an arriving round, which is literally like, this is what's happened to me since last we met, and this is what I'm dealing with right now, and this is what I'm going to try and leave at the door. Because, the year we've had, you absolutely cannot make any assumptions about how people will be feeling when they show up to a session. And because of that thing around so much communication is the non-verbal stuff that we might lose online, I think it's really important to give people an opportunity to say how they are and where they might be coming from in the session. So that's just at the beginning of the session, just kind of getting people into the right space for learning and managing expectations. And all of that creates this really, hopefully, really warm, accepting environment where people feel safe to contribute. You might talk about what it's like to fail, perhaps if it's a session where people need to have a go at things. So I do quite a lot of training for managers as coaches. So they're going to have a go at coaching, and it's scary and they might get it wrong, in inverted commas, but it's okay because this is a space for experimentation. So talking about all of that, I think without that, how can we expect anyone to be creative? Because our brains aren't in a creative space if we're afraid, are they? They're in survival mode instead. So just really creating that non-judgmental space, that space for learning. Those are some really practical ways that I do things. Obviously, there are many ways. But
Jennifer, one of the things that I'm fascinated with what you do is working with multinational groups, right? It's always a challenge. And I've done that as I've worked with particular people in Asia and bringing them together with more the Anglo-Saxon, environment. And there's always this difference. You may be using English, for example, but our use of words and what we understand is quite different. And as you work with many different organizations on a single Zoom call, for example, how do you attend to that and be respectful of bringing those different perspectives in without having them be misunderstood?
It's a really good point, Lois, isn't it? And the work that I've done in international organizations, I think what supports you, one, as you do that, is within an organization, there may be many cultures represented, but there is also an organizational culture about how we do things, which may not be explicit, but there will be, from my experience in the work I've done, some understanding and experience of that cross-cultural working. So as a facilitator, I need to partner with those people in the room to create a space where they feel able to ask for what they need and, question one another and explore with each other. So I think it's about absolutely understanding that those differences are there, but not letting them take over and allowing because I don't know all the answers. And I don't know and cannot presume to know what each individual person needs. And, the minute that you do that, I always find that the minute I've made a judgment about what someone might need, I'm proved wrong immediately.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
But actually, if I can use my skill and my understanding to create a space that enables those conversations to happen, that's the best use of my talents. I don't need to know the answers. I need to facilitate those people to find the answers themselves. There's something in the coaching training that I had around, we believe our clients to be capable, wise, and good. And that is a wonderful way of going into a session, a training session, or an online group session. I absolutely trust these people to know what they need. And I need to just create the environment where they can ask for that and they feel confident that they will get it.
It's creating that space where people feel confident is so huge. And I think right now there's also an underlying piece that goes on within our organizations, which is what is politically correct for the organization. So that freedom to be expressive, sometimes that lid gets put on that and it becomes a deterrent to accomplishing the goals. So how do you work with that?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? I find that it's a real honor and privilege to be able to sit outside of an organization's, to go into an organization and support learning of the individuals in there. And there is a real benefit to not being in the organization oneself. so that you can sit outside of that system and sort of notice and, gently challenge where you need to. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I worked in an organization as a learning and development manager for a few years before and as I was training to be a coach. And I ran some management development and leadership development there. And since running my own business, being outside of that organization, I've also run management development in that organization. I don't know what this says about me, but the interventions we've run, where I've partnered with my old colleague, but as a consultant to run these design and deliver these sessions, so much more successful when I'm sitting outside of the organization, because I've got a different perspective. I can bring in different new perspectives. I can challenge in a different way. I can notice when you're in something, it's difficult to notice when you're in an organizational culture.
Yes.
So I don't know if that answers your question. I think there's also something, isn't there, about psychological safety and how safe folk feel in a session to express their opinion. I think it depends very much on the culture of an organization, as you say, and what's going on as to where people are in a session. When if you arrive, you've no idea really where they are on that and how comfortable they are and how safe they feel. And, as you can only deal with the small system that you've got, which is this group of people, and making them feel as safe as possible within that. And so I think discussing the layers of confidentiality that are going on is really important as well. So what's confidential to the space? What might be confident? For example, use breakout rooms in Zoom. Well, I use breakout rooms in Zoom. Are we going to make sure that any small conversations that we have in those breakout rooms are kept confidential? It's really important to be that specific. Just saying, yes, everything in the session is confidential isn't enough. If you have a conversation with your colleague in a breakout room, you need there to be an agreement, I think, depending on the nature of the session, that if you're bringing stuff to the main group after that conversation, if you've brought something, then it's your job to bring it to the main group, that your colleague won't go, hey, Lois said this great thing and she said this, because actually that might make you feel uncomfortable. So I think the layers of confidentiality, for me going into an organization, I might be really explicit about, what I'm feeding back about what's happened. It might be around, my observations about future learning interventions and what they might focus on, for example. But I will be clear that the detail wouldn't be shared. So I think that's you can only be responsible for, the bit that you're responsible for, I suppose. But being aware of that, you don't know where people are going to be when they arrive. It's another reason why that arriving round is quite revealing, because you get a real sense of what people need and where their energy is.
Where their energy is. And I love that about what they're going to leave at the door. Because I think all too often when we're on Zoom, we don't think about that. When we have groups together, we think about it because it's in our face, right? But when they're at home, we figure that's safe, that's okay. We don't, and it is maybe more important because they're really inundated with that work-home balance in terms of how it's interfacing and the challenges that creates. I want to shift just for a moment to two things. One is, as you work with these groups and do your training, where do you see the biggest challenges right now for organizations with their learning and development, especially right now as we continue this hybrid model? But what are their biggest challenges for their development?
Well, we're going back to this point about communication. And I am a huge believer in the power of focusing and developing your working relationships. You know, in the work that I do, so many of the challenges that managers and leaders face, when you really, really boil it down, it's about building really strong working relationships with colleagues, with stakeholders. And so those challenges, like giving some feedback, some developmental feedback to a team member, having a courageous conversation with a colleague. These things, if there is a foundation of a really strong relationship built on trust, those things become, it doesn't become a courageous conversation. It just becomes a conversation. It doesn't become, oh my goodness me, I've got to give feedback. It just becomes an opportunity for some direct communication with my team member who I already have a brilliant relationship with. And so I know it's not quite your question, which was around training, but the challenge is for organizations, I think, is how do they continue to empower their individuals to build those really strong relationships, right, when they might be perceiving that this Zoom land or Teams land that we're in is not as conducive to that. So how do we keep investing in those relationships, right, outside when we can't actually see each other? So I anticipate that in some organizations, there will be a kind of sense of, wow, it does work online. Hooray, we will never go back to the office ever again. And there were definitely some plus sides to, a blend, as you say, this hybrid model. I think the challenge will be making sure that when we do get to spend time face to face, we're spending it on the right things. So I was asked once at last minute to facilitate a team, 2 or 3 day conference. This new team had been formed, been flown in from places around the world, and I was just to come in and facilitate. So I didn't have much of an input into the design of it'd already been sort of set up. And when I arrived, it became really, really clear that a lot of the sessions were this team who had been flown in from around the world, sitting in a room, watching a PowerPoint presentation of someone else, somewhere else in the world, dialing in. And, when you kind of understand how that has happened and understand that, they're wanting to use this time together to learn together. But taking a step back, you think, okay, wow, we're in a room together. We've got a couple of days. Like, what's the best use of that time? And I would hazard a suggestion that the best use of that time is, the stuff that is harder online. So building trust, getting to know each other, maybe working through some problems together, maybe making some decisions together, all those things that will are about the relationship. And you know what? Watching more PowerPoint presentations, you can do that when you're back in your office. You can all dial in and listen to a PowerPoint presentation. So I think my plea is, if you're getting people in a room face to face, please don't sit them in front of PowerPoint. Like, they can do that. We've learned that we can do that, from our kitchen tables or wherever we are working. So it's about being clever about the blend of learning. And lots of stuff has come out this year around how we blend that learning. So, I run programs which are a mixture of self-reflection and resources for self-guided learning, coming together for short Zoom sessions to share challenges and reflect. You might then also have, if you're in an organization, you might use your organizational social media channels like Slack or Yammer or whatever it is you use to create ongoing conversation to build on the learning. So it's a proper blend that appeals to lots of different learning styles. It is really not everybody in the room learning and then leaving and forgetting it all. And actually, we've been forced to be really super creative about that this year, because we have to do blended learning. It's not just a fun, nice thing to have anymore. It's actually the only way.
It is true. We have had to learn how to do things in a whole new way. coaching. You do a lot of coaching. So what have you discovered are the biggest needs that people have around coaching as they are trying to understand their new roles with the way we are currently doing work? And I don't know what your experience in the UK is, but I was just reading a McKinsey report that said actually what happened during this COVID and post-COVID time is the productivity level within corporations has skyrocketed. It's increased. And so given that, what is happening with your coaching and how are you, what are the issues, the challenges that you find people are experiencing that you help them work through?
So there's 101 answers to that, and it's different for every single coaching client because every single coaching client will find something different challenging about the situation. So, for example, I am an extrovert. So what I find challenging about this year is seeking enough input from other people so that my battery is properly charged, because that's something that I find is important to me.
Yes.
So every coaching client obviously has a different set of challenges. A theme I think running throughout is resilience and what that means for each individual. And like I say, what helps fill my tank is different to what might fill your tank or what might fill my partner's tank. And actually, as managers and leaders, it is about understanding that. And I think a lot of the work I do with managers and leaders is helping them understand how they can support their teams in the best way, understanding that their teams all might need something very different. Like we all need different things in order to feel energized. We all might, we only need to look at our own group social sets or our own friendship groups to know that everybody hits a sort of wall of exhaustion and I can't do it anymore at different times.
Yes.
It's a sort of, as a coach and as a leader and as a manager in an organization, it's just being cognizant of that, isn't it? And adding an extra layer of, what's the word? An extra layer of check-in, perhaps. Checking in with our teams. How are you doing? What do you need? Without making any assumptions about what that might be. You might think, oh my goodness me, this person in my team needs a week off. And actually what this person needs is like to talk it through for an hour. And actually that's what they need. We can't, certainly as coaches, we would never assume to know what our clients need. It's our job to create the space and the structure to allow them to explore that. And I think that this is one of the reasons I've absolutely loved doing running manager as coach sessions this year. So actually, it's enabling and empowering and skilling up those managers and leaders so that they can create that space for their team to have those bigger, broader, more open-ended conversations with their team members, so that their team members can feel heard. Because everybody, we all might need something different right now.
I think that's so important, being heard, and you want to be heard by the people that it matters with, right? So having our leaders within organizations empowered to do that is, I think, going to become more and more important. It's always been important, but I think it's becoming even more so.
Yeah. Really
Jennifer,
good point.
Our time is almost up. So I want to ask you, what have we not talked about that you think is really important for people to think about relative to executive coaching or development within organizations?
Well, I think there's two things. The first thing is this year has absolutely shown us that there is space for executive coaching. And, obviously we would say this, Lois, we're coaches and we understand the impact we can have with clients, but people are more isolated. There are fewer informal spaces for people to express themselves, to talk things through, to be seen and be heard. And there is absolutely a role for us to play as coaches to provide that for people this year. And I think the second thing is really around a confidence thing. You know, you don't have to be an executive coach or a learning and development professional to create a fun and engaging online learning environment. So I'm thinking about my partner who he is in finance. So he works for the UK government in one of their departments in counter fraud. Now, to me, like, it makes me think finance, I'm switched off. It sounds like if I'm going to be called to one of his sessions, there's going to be a lot of PowerPoint and figures. And that's not where my brain's at. But my partner has had so much amazing feedback from his online learning sessions this year. Absolutely nothing to do with me. I've not been involved at all. Just because he's just approached them in quite a creative way, you know, quizzes, like being a bit unexpected, telling stories, you know. So you don't need to be a learning professional. You just need to think, what are people not expecting? What's a bit different than me just sharing this stuff? How can I engage them? You know? So yeah, if my partner can do it, and he's a super creative guy, but he is, you know, in finance.
He's analytical.
Yeah, it's you can, you know, you just need to believe in yourself and think, okay, what do I want people to be saying at the end of this session about how it was? How do I want them to be feeling? And what do I want them to have learned? There you go. Work back from there.
That is so wonderful. What is it that we want them to learn, and having that confidence that we can help create it? Jennifer, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to hear the perspective on what can be done within corporations, especially now and moving forward. I love your perspective and that energy that you bring. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lois. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
And for those of you who are listening to Building My Legacy, thank you for being with us. We will have information about Jennifer in our show notes so that if you would like to contact her, you will be able to do so. And please remember to visit our website at buildtomorrow.com and our social media at buildtomorrow.com.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.